Jeremiah 29:11 says, I'm going to start with 10. It says, you will be in Babylon for 70 years, and I will come to you and do good things for you that I have promised. I will bring you home again, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are to give you good and not for disaster, to give you hope in the future. In those days you will pray and I will listen. If you look for me wholeheartedly, you will find me. I will be found by you, says the Lord. I will end your captivity and restore your fortunes. I will gather you out of the nations where I sent you and bring you home again to your own land. Ecclesiastes 6:10 says, everything has already been decided long ago what each person would be, so there's no arguing with God about your destiny. And Jeremiah 1:5 says, I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart, appointed you as my prophet to the nations. Along with Proverbs 1:39, God knows your past, your present, and your future. He's been there with you through everything, good, bad, the hard times, and sad, whether I was running for him or whether I was walking with him. Numerous spots in the Bible says he's going to go behind you and before you. So he knows what you're going to do before you do it. I'm going to start out from telling you where I came from. My parents were married later in life. I have an older sister and an older brother. My brother was 19 when I was born. My sister was 15. My brother was already dating my sister-in-law at the time when I was born. My dad and my mom both come from a real Christian family. My dad was a preacher, sang in gospel groups my whole life. There was never a time in my life where I didn't know who God was. One of my first words was Jesus. At 4 years old, I could tell you the disciples by a book that my mom had. We would sit there and read. My favorite Bible story was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. My life was centered around God. Even my first gospel singing, I was 10 days old. They followed the verse Proverbs 22:6, where it says, train up a child in the way so where he should go, so when he is old, he won't depart. When I was 4 years old, my oldest niece was born, and then at 6, my second niece was born. Shortly after that, my sister-in-law and my brother separated, and my sister-in-law got into the drug lifestyle. For a while there, it turned my whole family into turmoil. It was calm. I looked up to my sister-in-law and my sister, my mom and my grandmother, but when my sister-in-law left, it created chaos in my whole family. My nieces was with me and my mom, my dad. They grew up for a while as more like my sisters than my nieces and my nephews. I hated drugs at that point in time. I didn't want no part of them, didn't want none of it, because I seen what it done to them. It puts a stronghold on people. Not long after my sister-in-law left, matter of fact, she was gone at the time, I went home with a friend of mine on a Sunday. It was on a Friday after school, the week of spring break. My niece Jenny got ran over while she was at my sister-in-law's house. The day before, she begged me not to leave her at the daycare she was staying at, and I just left anyway. When my dad was coming to pick me up that morning, and my mom called in my friend's house, and she said, y'all just meet us at the emergency room. She said, Jeannie's been ran over and they airlifted her. So we got there, and that was the first time I felt guilt. I wasn't no more than, I think I was in 4th grade at the time. I was like 10 years old. And I felt like the worst guilt on me. I felt guilty for leaving her that day. Not long after she got out of the hospital, not long after that, same year, I went home from church with the guy that played in my dad's group. He sang. He was actually the church piano player. I went home to play with his nieces and nephews, and I was molested there at his house. That started the devil's strongholds and activity in my life. John 10:10 says the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And he does that by starting with your mind in a process and through trauma. If he can get a foothold any way he can, he will use that against you. That was when I learned to be negative, be critical, and hate myself. He started gaining ground in me, and that was the first battle he won. He made me feel guilty, broken, wrong, according to all feelings that I never should have had. I went home that day and I told him I went straight, took a bath, was getting ready for church that night, and I went straight to my grandmother's house next door. My mom's mom lived next door to me my whole life. She was who I ran to. She was everybody in our family's stronghold. I went to her house and I told her what happened. She promised me I'd never have to live that again. She told me she'd take care of it, not to worry about it, forget it ever happened. So I done exactly what she said, and I left it alone. I think she knew then that people in my family would hurt the man if she ever said it, and it would just make me relive the stories. Well, she promised nothing was ever going to hurt me again. The next 3 years, I tolerated stuff, but she was always there. A friend of mine down the road from our house that I grew up with, he died the same day, and he was buried the same day my sister got married. Not long after that, my granddaddy died, or right before that, I can't really remember. My grandmother's health started deteriorating. She moved in the house with me. My grades in school started dropping. Then not long after that, my grandma decided she wanted to buy me my first computer so my grades would come up and I would be happy. That was one of the biggest mistakes of anybody's life I could have done. The internet caused me to, I went from being a food addiction, because I was always bigger in life, to internet addiction, which came along with chat rooms, attention from guys, turned into a sex addiction, a porn addiction, and anything that would make me temporarily feel good. After my granny died, though, heartache and depression came, brought on by self-harm. All the addictions got out of hand. I became continuously assumed with the computer. My mom tried to get me to go to a counselor, but I learned how to lie, and at that point could conceive everybody that I wanted to. What I told them was how it was going to be. But during that time, I was still involved in church. I was in the youth group, Bible drill, went to church camps, went through all kinds of Christian retreats, singings every weekend with my daddy. But behind closed doors, I was living a lie. I had let the devil win dominion over my thoughts and my actions. I believed there was all the titles that were bad, and I could believe was what I believed over myself. I believed I was a problem child, a wild, I was a liar, many other labels. Many nights, during this time, my niece was born, the one that has the baby. She was born, and the only thing that kept me from killing myself at that time was her. I didn't want her to have that over her. I wanted her to look up to somebody. She's the only thing that kept me doing right at that age. Many nights I stayed at my best friend's house, talked about suicide, but I couldn't and wouldn't because of her. And at that time, we was in band, and not long after that, I dropped out of band, and then I would not complete anything from the time I was in high school to that. My friends slowly changed. About the time I was in 11th grade in high school, I started dating a guy, and me and him started drinking really bad. He was the first guy I got engaged to. And then while I was dating him, I had a wreck, and I broke my neck. I broke all my teeth off. I had blood clots, and for a long time it caused me to miss a whole lot of school. And then not long after that, me and him broke up, which the only way I knew to deal with that was other men. And that wasn't the way God designed it to be. To mend a broken heart ain't to jump into with other people. He designed intimate encounters to be between a husband and a wife and only for them. But because of that, with each partner, I intimately got a piece of my soul was missing even more. I finally graduated school missing all I could miss from the wreck. But the wreck left me with pain pills. I love pain pills at that point. Most of the time my mom and daddy did not know what I was doing. They had no idea I was taking pain pills like I wasn't supposed to. They had no idea I was drinking. They did know I was dating the wrong men. I graduated in May of 2005. Not long after that, I started dating men in prison. First one was in August of 2005, and I became addicted to convicts, if that's a possibility. I went to college for a few months and dropped out of it. Then I started cosmetology school. That didn't last long either. I started dating another guy, moved him into my mom and daddy's house. A lot of that happened in this time. I got introduced to the actual drug lifestyle then. I was driving him back and forth to Memphis every Thursday night when he got his paycheck from work. We was picking up weed for weeks. I let him do it by himself. He started with cocaine, and then I started trying it. I done it a handful of times. Me and him broke up. Then I went back to cosmetology school. No, this was my first cosmetology school. Sorry. I married the guy in prison. He gave me an ultimatum to quit using crack or to leave him. So I chose him over the crack. During this time, I had not told anybody else I was molested until I told the man in jail. At that time, he made me tell my mama. He didn't give me a choice. My family did not approve at all about my marriage in prison. But I finally found somebody I could trust to talk to. The whole way to the prison the day that I wanted to marry him, I was fighting a spiritual warfare. The day before, I had went to a singing where my dad was singing at, and the lady that was singing with him just begged me not to get married. But I done it. I found out he was addicted to Xanaxes not long after that. I thought because I gave up crack and cocaine just that easy that it was okay to give up. He could give up his pills, and it wasn't like that. We separated. Matter of fact, I never seen him after that day. Not long after that, I started dating a guy and ended up pregnant. I had a miscarriage on Christmas Eve. I went back to my doctor, and I was pregnant with my daughter. The same day I found out I was pregnant, he kicked me out. I moved back to home with my mom and dad. I had my daughter. At that time, I was dating a man, and me and him had our own house. The day she turned a year old, he moved out, and I moved back in with my parents. 2 weeks to the day, I met the guy that my son's dad. I thought he didn't have no addictions. He was just addicted to the gym, so I might be okay. That was the most toxic relationship I'd ever been in my life. I wound up having him, my son, found out the guy was married. When my son was small, I decided to go back to cosmetology school. But then not long after that, my son got real sick. The day my niece with the baby's sister had a car wreck, and we was in Le Bonheur Hospital. While we was at Le Bonheur, I gave the son's daddy the ultimatum to either come up there and see him or I was leaving. Well, we left. He didn't come. Him and his wife was back together at the time. Around that time, my son got a little bit better, and not long after that, Trent moved to Pontotoc. Me and Trent became real good friends. We have known each other off and on my whole life. His granddaddy was friends with my daddy and mom. Me and Trent became woodworking together. We went to wrestling together. I would help do his makeup when he was wrestling. I met a guy at wrestling. His name was, they don't know. We started dating. We moved in together. Trent moved in with us. And the dude's parents moved in with us. Not long after that, me and the guy's mama was at Walmart, and I caught my first charge. I caught a shoplifting charge with her. At that same time, my son's daddy tried to start getting custody, and we was all fighting in a custody battle with him with visitation rights. The guy's mom decided to move out. During this time, we had wrestlers coming in and out of our house on weekends. We were doing all kinds of smoking weed, drinking, whatever. My kids usually was at with mama's during all this time. We decided to move out of that trailer and we got an apartment. Me and that guy, Trent, moved back to his mom's. And me and Nitro and my best friend decided she was gonna move in with us because her and her wife were separating. And my best friend and the guy I was dating started using crystal meth. Not long after that, I got taken off of the Klonopins I had been on and my Adipex, and I started smoking dope. Not long after that, the guy I was seeing tried to kill himself with my children in the car. I called 911. They came and got him. He went to jail. When he got out of jail, he blamed me for him going to jail. He carried me to Boonville one night, and we were at his house. My kids was at my parents', and he held me down and shot me up with dope for the first time. I almost died. I had enough sanity about myself to crawl out of that trailer and go to the guy's house that my sister-in-law had left my brother for, and he got me sober enough to drive home to Ecru. And I drove home. I made it to the dope lady's house, and she helped the best she could to get me sober enough so she could call my dad and tell him to come get me. She didn't want me to drive any further. She tried to get him to get me into rehab that night. We had a big family intervention, and my sister, my brother, and my parents tried to get me to go, but I thought I knew more than they did, and I thought it was just going to be a one-time thing and that meetings would help. I had my own apartment still. At this point in time, I stayed at home for a few days, and I went back to my apartment. I had several of my friends, my friend that was living there, she moved back in with her mom, and her wife moved in with me. Coming along with that was several drug dealers living in the house with me. They were in and out. I was using for free pretty much. But during that time, I started hanging out with the wrong person, and he told me about a murder that he committed. After that, I went crazy, and he convinced they were giving me bad drugs. When they would sell me drugs, it was bad. It wasn't. They were selling bath salts. I was going literally as crazy as you could go. I was paranoid. Things was my dad. I would go hang out. Me and Trent would hang out and do woodworking in the shed, but stuff would be. I would go in there one night, and then the next morning they would think Mom and Daddy just thought I was crazy. Things were getting moved around. People was playing literally with my mind at that time. The drugs was not helping. I met a friend of mine. Me and him took a weekend trip to Nashville. I left my kids there. Still during this time, numerous prison relationships was going on. I was addicted to men as bad as I could. I met a guy in prison though, and he introduced me to a guy from South Mississippi named Jason. And later on, that makes a big significance in this. But he introduced me to that guy. Me and him started talking. I've never met him. Started hanging out with a friend of mine one night. We came back to my mom's, and my sister come over there. Needless to say, this first time ever, but me and my sister got in a knockdown, drag out fight, and I wound up in jail. She got me court ordered to rehab. I went to rehab at Whitfield. And I learned what I was doing was covering up my feelings about the drugs. Every time I had a feeling, I would go get high. It would just cover it up. I didn't have to deal with it. Days later, the problem wouldn't be as bad. But I still didn't understand the depth of what I was going through. At rehab, the woman told me I had to forgive the abuser. So I tried to start letting him, because they said as long as I was letting him have dominion over me, that he was winning, he wasn't being bothered. I used just to take all those emotions that I didn't know how to deal with away. At rehab, a chaplain told me, she said, one of these days you're going to be a strong leader, and you're going to be a minister or a minister's wife. And I told her, I said, you're crazy, woman. I said, there's no way. I said, my dad's a preacher, and that's the closest to a preacher's wife I'm going to get. My whole family are preachers. I don't want no part of it once I get out. I was like, no, you got me messed up. When I got out, my mom and dad came and picked me up. When I drove 3 hours home, there was a sack of dope in my mailbox waiting on me when I got there. I was not ready to be done. I wanted to be done, but I wasn't ready. At that point in time, everybody knew I was in rehab, so I met a new dope man. And I met a guy that I was in the last wreck I was in with. We were so high, I let him drive my dad's truck because I knew I couldn't drive. We flipped and I was ejected from the vehicle. The cops told me if I wouldn't have been high, I'd have been dead. just by the grace of God, we wasn't arrested because there was all kind of drugs in that car. After me and him broke up, I started messing with drugs and alcohol a little bit harder. And I started talking to a guy I knew my whole life from up and down the street from me. I wound up moving in with him. My kids liked him. He wasn't on drugs, but he was alcoholic. A really bad alcoholic. It got to where one of my nieces moved across the street from us. Me and him was in a knockdown we was in knockdown drag out fights every night. I was drinking to keep me and him fighting, along with using drugs. One night we went and picked up a friend of his, and they drugged me. 4 days I don't know what I was on, but for 4 days I was passed out in his bedroom. I woke up long enough it should have killed me, honestly. I woke up and I called my sister-in-law. I couldn't let my mama or my kids and them see me the way I was at that time. She called my brother. We went to Biloxi for the weekend. On the way there, we had to stop by her house. Her oldest daughter and her youngest daughter was there, and all they asked me was I okay? I honestly think they thought I was going to die at that point. I'd never seen fear on either one of their faces until that day. On the way to Biloxi, me and my sister-in-law was driving. I was in and out of sleep. I remember her pulling over at this church. It was the prettiest church I'd ever seen. It was the shape of a lighthouse. She's a Pokemon hunter, so she was Pokemon stopping. And we stopped at this church, and it was the light on the lighthouse was on. It was the prettiest thing I had ever seen. I didn't even realize eventually this church would have a part in my life, but that's the church I go to today. In Biloxi, me and my sister-in-law sat on the beach a good bit. It was cold. It was too cold to swim. There's a gorgeous lighthouse there, and the whole time there I could think of the old song my dad used to sing, The Lighthouse, and the memories that he told me while he was on the beach. The first time he ever heard it, he was on the beach, and he was sitting out looking over a lighthouse when Vesta Goodman sang that song for the first time. And that song just brought back all those memories. And my sister-in-law asked me, she said, why don't you move to my Uncle Lloyd, which is my mom's younger brother's house? She said, you can get sober there. And I was like, I wanted to, but I still wasn't ready. The thought, though, kept going through my mind about it. We went home. Not long after that, I started hanging out with a friend of mine in Trent that wrestled in Louisiana, and I was going there quite often on weekends. On the way back, I would stop at my uncle's house every time, and we would go out to eat, and I would spend the night there. The last time I went to Louisiana, I had car trouble. It was the worst trip of my life. I left there feeling hopeless. The worst I could ever feel. I wound up talking to that guy that I'd never met. I met through a guy in prison. He got me the money to make it to my uncle's house. And I was supposed to go home this was on Sunday, and I was supposed to go home on Tuesday. Well, my child support didn't hit my card. So I asked my uncle that day, I said, can I move in with you? And he said, yeah, we'll try to get sober. So I moved to my Uncle Lloyd's house. That was probably July or August that year, and I stayed until November. Off and on, I would come back and forth to Pontotoc. When I was in Pontotoc, I would get high. Down there, I didn't get high, I didn't mess with nothing. But I'd always come back high. I went to Kosciuszko in October of that year to Mississippi and hung out with a friend of mine. We decided to come back to my mama's. Well, in the process, my uncle died in Alabama, and my daddy had to go preach his funeral. We wound up going to my Uncle Melvin's house, and we stayed there one night. My uncle told me, he said, Kayla, this is your time to get sober. He said, you can do this. Me and him was the only ones up that night. He said, you can do this. He said, if you want to. He said, you've got enough of both of your granddaddies stubborn, and you can get over this, and you can make it through. He said, you just got to fight. I started thinking of that, and when we got back from Alabama, we went back to Kosciuszko, and the girl I was with wrecked my car, told her that I was stranded there. While I was there, my uncle that I lived with's wife died. My sister-in-law and him had to come save me once again. But when I got home that time, my uncle told me, he said, either you sober up or you're going to have to move. So I was trying my best to get sober. I started going to church with him. then I met the man I'm married to today. Um, well, I really didn't meet him there. He was living down there, and I had met him previously at my apartment. He was one of our drug dealers, but he was living down there and he was sober. So me and him started talking. My uncle wouldn't go for that, his house. So we wound up getting a motel room for a few weeks, and then he moved to a sober living house. The very next week, my mom and them came down for they were coming down for the week before Thanksgiving to pick me up and go to Pontotoc for the week. Well, I decided to go get wedding rings. We moved back home on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Me and him was married. 3 weeks after we started dating. We moved to Pontotoc because my uncle wouldn't let us live with him. For 4 months we stayed sober, and then his cousin got killed. He was 10 and he died, and we relapsed. We went to get a sack of dope, and on the whole way there, I told him, I was like, on the whole way back afterwards, I told him, I said, let's not do this. I said, God is talking to me right now, telling me he's going to show me how bad it's going to get if we go back through this. He was like, you're just crazy. I was like, okay. So we wound up doing it. Within a month, we were shooting dope again. We then got back on the needle. Started smoking, got back on the needle. We were selling dope within the next month. By April of that year, he was selling for one of the biggest drug dealers in North Mississippi. And her daughter told me, she said, if you don't want to go to prison, she said, you better get out of here. She said, the woman's being watched and she's going to turn on y'all. Before we could leave, he was arrested. Cops told us the same thing sitting in the parking lot of Ecru, that we was supposed to go to prison. So I called my uncle and I asked him if we could move back down there. And me and my uncle talked. Me and Josh moved right back down there. Josh was working for the carnival. He was still selling drugs, back and forth selling. We were trying to hide it. It just kept getting worse and worse. And in July the 4th, my mom and dad came down there for 4th of July, and they knew something was. Had to be done, but they didn't do nothing. We came up here one weekend after that, and we went to the carnival, and then he had to go see his probation officer. I played games with my kids that day, and they begged me not to leave. I mean, both of them was begging me to stay there, and we should have stayed, but we didn't. I told him I'd be back the next week because his mom was having surgery. He went home. He started working for the guy that sent me money that day to make it to my uncle's. Within a week, that guy asked him to go get him some drugs. The night before he went and got him the sack of drugs, though, we was on our last sack of dope, and I told him I was like, I'm done. I prayed that night. I was like, Lord, just get me out of here one way. I saved enough for the next morning. The next morning, I couldn't get high. There was nothing I could do. I tried to get high. Before we went to go buy that guy some drugs, well, I tried and tried to get high. I couldn't do it. I forgot I promised God the night before I wasn't going to do no more. When he went to deliver the drugs, I got back. I went in Dollar General. I had the drugs on me. I went back to him. I handed him the drugs. I got in the car. He sold everything he wanted to sell. He got back in the car, and we were swarmed by Rankin County police. We both was arrested. That was August the 1st of 2022. My uncle, at that point in time, me and my sister wasn't talking. We had fell out again before I moved back to Jackson. Matter of fact, none of my family really, except my mom was. My mom and my dad and my kids were talking to me. My kids was sometimes, they wouldn't look, very little. The night I went to jail, I called my uncle. He told me, he said, you ain't even got a place to live anymore. That night, the ladies from the church I go to now showed up to, from J&T Church, ladies showed up. And a lady came in with a, accordion, and she played songs from my childhood. At this point in time, I had lost my eyesight. I could barely see. I lost my family. I couldn't even remember the songs, the gospel songs my dad had been singing since I was a baby. And that's my life. Gospel music, still to this day, is my life. Slowly, she sang that night, and she told me, she said, I don't know what you're fighting, but you need to surrender. That night in my jail cell, I went in there and I prayed, and I told God, I said, Lord, I can't do it any other way. I said, would you please just come in and save me? I was like, I'll just do whatever. I surrendered to Him that night. And Lord, I told Him, I was like, the next day, we didn't have church every day, but we actually wasn't supposed to the next day, but the only other people from Brandon that I knew at the time was some of the people where my ex had went to, or my husband had went to rehab, and these ladies from there come in, and it was just a sign to me that was the life I was supposed to be living. Within a month of being in jail, I got my sister started talking to me again. I was in church. I was leading others to Christ. It was a rough time during that, but during my whole jail cell, I stayed 10 months in county, and then I wound up going to prison for 3 months. I actually got out of prison before my original court date. During that time, I started really getting into the church that I was doing. My uncle let me move out. I paroled to his house when I paroled, the one that said I could never come back home. God worked during all this. At the point in time when I went to prison, I had lost Trent. Me and him was not talking. He's one of my best friend. Me and my other best friend, Becca, had quit talking. During this time I was in jail, I restored all the relationships that I had lost. And then the lady, when I went to CMCF, the lady who had prophesied over me at rehab, she was the lady who done my intake. And she asked me, she said, have you quit running yet? I was like, yes ma'am, I have. And she's like, I can tell. She said, there's a whole difference about you. She said, the look on you is a whole totally different look. And one second, sorry. While I was in jail, I was reading my Bible one night, and the Lord was working. He's been working on me ever since. I grew up in I would say a Methodist and Baptist type of church, but he was working on me one night, and he told me, he said, "You're fixing to start going to this Pentecostal church," and I was like, "I'm not doing this. I'm not going to wear skirts every day. I'm not going to wear makeup every day. I'm just not doing this, God." And I opened my Bible, and on Ezekiel 20:48 it says, "For everyone in the world will see I've set you on fire, and it will not be put out." And then Daniel 3 says, when speaking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that when they came out of the fire, not a singe of their clothes were burned. The flames did not even smell of smoke. God will put you through trials right before you come out, and you'll be better than before. God, that just kept going through my head. God kept telling me, "Be still. I'm gonna know. You'll know I'm God." And He just kept telling me, "Be still." Through all this, I was baptized in Rankin County Jail too. And upon that, when I did, I went into jail under spiritual, mental, and physical bondage. But upon the release, I left free. The lady that goes to my church, she wrote a book called The Woolly Worm, and it's in the transformation of a butterfly, like the one of a caterpillar to a butterfly. I went in like a caterpillar, leaving like a butterfly on a journey to a new life with a new future and destiny, not drugs and alcohol. I got out of prison. I started going to the JNT church that the ladies was talking to me, the one that my sister-in-law ran up on that night. I still don't have it all under control. I still fight daily with addiction. I'm not using, but I still fight it. I called my sister-in-law last week and I told her, I was in the worst, no, 2 weeks ago, I called her and I was in the worst funk I've been in since I got out of jail, don't know why. I called her, I said, when I go to Pontotoc, you gotta get me away from Pontotoc for a little while. I said, if not, I'll be using it again. We went to Tishomingo last week and it was refreshing to just be out there and to see nature and to be able to get away without drugs. That baby right there is the good reason I'm sober today. I can't have a relationship with him or my other nieces and nephews. My kids, getting my kids back, and everybody that's here, they wouldn't have been here before. Well, my mom would, my daddy would, but I had lost all these other people. I wouldn't have done it without that. But in order for you to get off doing anything like that, you got to let your demons come out. You gotta fight with them in order to, you gotta open up, let them come out. You can't live in that life. And the longer you live in the life where you're hiding everything, the longer you're gonna suffer, and the longer you're not gonna be yourself. You can't be who God wants you to be if you hide under a bushel. That's all I got.